I've frequently or infrequently have considered the problem, how do we explain the reversal of time in my assessment or in my observation of the microcap 12 assessment of energy versus power in a circuit when a transient occurs in the very beginning, when we turn on a circuit. Sorry. How do we explain that in terms of physics or in terms of the real world, in terms of our observation and experience, that time can go backwards for energy within a circuit from our perspective, even though from the perspective of the energy inside the circuit, time is still moving forward and dissipating due to entropy, but because from our perspective outside the circuit, it's actually doing the opposite, growing in amplitude due to a reversal of time. What is actually happening to cause us to come to these conclusions? Maybe they're erroneous conclusions. I'm sorry. Maybe time is not actually going backwards, but something else is happening, and that's what I've realized now. That the reversal of time from our perspective of the energy inside the circuit is a net conclusion, a conclusion drawn from the net result of our point of view and various other factors. And so now I'm going to explain myself not directly, not explicitly, but implicitly by way of an analogy. So it'll be up to you or somebody else besides you or me to work out the actual description in terms of reality. But I'm going to explain it in terms of an analogy so that you can see where I'm going with this line of reasoning, okay? So you're on the freeway and you pass someone on the freeway. Now, what do you do when you pass someone? You're going faster than they are. Now, let's say the speed on the freeway is our rate of moving forward in time. We all know about time dilation, the twin paradox. You know, a twin gets on one brother or sister of a twin. They get on a rocket ship and they fly somewhere far away nearly at the speed of light, and they come back nearly at the speed of light. And each of them has a watch on their wrist. The guy or the gal who stayed behind is now long since dead and buried, and the one that went traveling and returns is heartbroken because now they're all alone without their twin, and they've only aged a few seconds maybe, or a fraction of a second. I'm sorry. I have a condition. It's called old age. Okay. So, what actually happened was the traveler, his time frame slowed down due to his acceleration in space. Meanwhile, the guy or the gal who stayed behind, their time frame remained much quicker because their movement in space was much slower. Now, we all know if they're both on planet Earth, they're going to be traveling anyway. But they're not. Or let's just say they're in a galaxy and the galaxy is spinning. They're traveling anyway at the speed at which the rotation of the galaxy is occurring. And this is a very important point. It's not a sidebar that has no impact whatsoever. It has everything to do with how we interpret the situation. So, if you're passing somebody on the freeway, and because you're going faster than they are, doesn't mean they're going backwards. Yet you look at them and it looks like they're going backwards. Hey, dude, we're supposed to be moving forward. What the hell are you going backwards for? Yet if we look at the road, we see we're both moving forward. But if we ignore the road, ignore the wheels, and merely look at the position of our fellow traveler who we are passing, who we are passing, it looks like they've gone backwards. They've decided, okay, we've changed our mind. We're not going to head forward like we thought we were. We're going to turn around and go backwards. Well, they didn't even bother to turn around. They just decided to put their car in reverse and go backwards. No, of course not. You're both moving forward. You're passing him because you're moving faster. And this is really, I think, how to go about interpreting the reversal of time. Because there are various factors of reactance that, such as capacitance and inductance, but then there's duration, And more importantly, there's frequency of oscillation. And if somebody, if the person you're passing on the freeway, if your speed now gets translated, and we step out of the analogy into the real world, so I guess I'm answering my own question, and you decide to speed up your rate of vibration. Meanwhile, the person you're passing either maintains his rate of vibration or decides to even slow it down. Now, the rate at which you two guys are functioning is you're literally passing him on the freeway. It's as if you're going faster, because what I found from experience is that you can take a simulation and it'll take, maybe, let's say, a minute from its initial input of, let's say, 1 microwatt to reach 100,000 watts. It might take a minute to get there, RMS, and you average it out or whatever. But if you change the frequency of that input, your base frequency that all kinds of other frequencies are now going to build up on top of, if you change that, if you increase it, it takes less time to reach 100,000 watts of power than it did before. And if you diminish the frequency, it takes longer. In fact, it takes so long, it may not increase at all. Entropy may take over and overwhelm the circuit, and you don't get an increase of reactive power that you can convert into real power by passing it through a resistive heating element or a resistive light bulb or whatever, a resistive element of some kind, and then put it to good use. So you've got all this reactive power building up at different rates depending just on one factor alone, changing the frequency of oscillation. You can change other factors such as capacitance and inductance, which will also impact the net result of how quickly does the reactive power build up. But just looking at the simplest way to describe this to lay people, let's say, is the frequency of oscillation. So reactive power will accumulate and build up not because you're giving it more energy, but because it's bouncing around in between the capacitances and the inductances, which are multiples. They're not singular. It's not an LRC concept or an LC concept. This is, at minimum, pairs of inductances, pairs of capacitances at minimum, because the field of one capacitor is going to modify the field of the other capacitor and vice versa. They're going to take turns. Likewise, the field of the inductor is going to alter the field of the other inductor and vice versa, take turns. And so we get this parametric influence taking place. And if you've ever done experiments in parametric alteration of a circuit, I did it with capacitors on my website, vinyasi.info/N as in Nancy, E as in Edward. No, I did it in RealSim. So vinyasi.info/RealSim, RealSim. You can put a switch element in there that's not connected to anything and just flip the switch. And you can take your capacitors, and they have a preset minimum, maximum, and capacitance. The capacitance, I think, is preset to 10 microfarads, I'm guessing. I can't remember. And the minimum and the maximum are the same as each other. And if you change them, making the maximum bigger and the minimum smaller than each other, when you toggle the switch inside the circuit, even though it's not connected to anything, I have it rigged so that it'll impact the capacitors in question, that you've modified the maximum and minimum values of capacitance so that it may start out at one value, but now it's going to go to the maximum value versus the minimum every time you toggle the switch. Either open or closed will be one toggle, and the capacitance will change and go back and forth. Just as an example. And if you set the capacitances high enough, and if you set their discrepancy large enough, and because these capacitance values are changing abruptly, not a sweep, not a glissando in the music world, not a sweep movement, no, more like, it jumps up, it jumps down, and of sufficient height or amplitude of capacitance and sufficient discrepancy between the highs and the lows, you can get a modification of energy, and it takes turns. On one cycle, it'll be a change of amplitude, a change of amperage, and the next half cycle it'll be a change of voltage, depending on which way you're going. And to go up, to increase the amplitude of amperage versus voltage, you have to create the alteration, either maximum or minimum. You jump to one or the other just before your sine wave crests at its peak, and just before it hits the nadir, the lowest point. But if you do it immediately after it passes the nadir, the lowest point, or after it reaches the crest, the peak, the opposite will happen. You'll lose amperage, alternating with losing voltage on each half cycle, so that over time you lose wattage. Or you gain, depending on when in the cycle of oscillation do you perform this parametric alteration of capacitance. And so I learned from that some things, but it doesn't teach me everything about parametric alteration of energy. But it tells me what Jim Murray confirmed in one of his lectures, in his presentations at the Science, Energy, and Technology Conference in Hayden, Idaho, or Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, depending on where Aaron Murakami hosts it. I think it was 2013 or 2012? No, 2013. I think I was there. He talked about his transforming generator. It's a generator run by a motor, and he's got two extra coils, one on each side, adjacent to the main generator coil. And he runs it with a motor, and he can get parametric alteration of the fields of the two extra coils because each modifies the field of the other in the course of the oscillations taking place. And so you have to have these inductances in pairs or these capacitances in pairs so that the field of one type of reactive power, or reactive impedance, maybe if you prefer, is able to modify the same type of the other component and take turns. They take turns. They're like dancers, creating a spin, holding hands, and each one takes turns flicking the other in the same direction, let's say clockwise. And so they keep up their momentum. They don't slow down because each one puts in more energy, taking turns doing it. Well, this alteration of either capacitive reactance or inductive reactance can do the same thing because each of a pair takes turns modifying the other partner of that pair. And this goes beyond simple LC circuit, in which you only have one inductor and one capacitor, and that's it. And all you think about, you're taught to think about, programmed, brainwashed to think about, is resonance, or, you hit the, what is it called, the impedance matching. You try to get the capacitor and the inductor to resonate by matching their impedances with the frequency in question, that all three. But that's simplistic. When you start to complicate matters by having at least two inductors, at least two capacitors, plus the frequency, now you don't have simple resonance and impedance matching anymore. Now you have parametric variation. You literally can make it look like energy disappeared or appeared out of nowhere or into nowhere, when in fact it's dissipating due to entropy all the time. It just doesn't look that way because of efficiency. Reactance is the qualification of efficiency that requalifies the appearance of energy by changing how it gets reused. Does it get reused a greater quantity at a faster rate, or does it get reused a lesser quantity at a slower rate? Can make all the difference between making it look like energy is disappearing into nowhere on top of the entropic losses, or it's appearing out of nowhere despite the entropic losses. This is the weirdness of the way we look at things. And then we program the software of our simulators to look at the situation the same way we do. And the net result is, when we see what we're told is not possible, energy manifesting out of nowhere, energy disappearing into nowhere, we think, well, it's a problem with the simulator, the computer, number round off, which cannot happen anymore. The likelihood of round off error is so slim to none due to our use now of 64-bit registers within our computers, such as Windows 10, it's nearly impossible to get round-off error. It's going to have to be some other kind of error. And it's not going to be theoretical error because the software of simulators are based on known theories that are known to be true from over a century of experience among electrical engineers and physicists. So it's not a hypothesis what I'm talking about here. It may be harder to create over unity of a circuit, more energy out than what goes in, the appearance of more energy coming out than what goes in, due to a paucity, a lack of round-off error, but it's not impossible because the theory of the mathematical theory behind electrical engineering supports everything I say. I'm telling you the experience of somebody who's run simulations now for over 6 years. The first year might have been 3 years worth in 1 year's time because I did so much work in each day. It was probably equivalent to 2 or 3 days worth of work because I had so much trial and error to get through, to get experience before I even begin to ask questions. Okay, what's going on here? And now I got to go look it up and see what people have to say about this. People who are engineers or physicists, scientists, because the people doing free energy don't study the theory. They just say, oh, look what I did. And they don't know why. I couldn't give a shit about how to do it. I want to know why. And so I did trial and error like Thomas Edison because I know zippity-doo-dah about electrical engineering, except one thing. The way we teach Ohm's law is screwed. And I don't know why. I didn't know why when I tried taking beginning electrical classes in community college, freshman year of college, 30 years ago at Santa Monica City College. I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew there was something wrong about how they teach Ohm's law, and I know why now. But I won't get into it. Although it's a whole other series of topics in itself. I'm just looking at explaining this so-called phenomenon of free energy and where does it come from. Well, first you have to authorize it to occur by having a transient. And that's not so hard to do because transients always happen at the beginning, at the very least, at the beginning when you turn on a circuit. And a transient is the appearance of the reversal of time. It looks like time went backwards for like a fraction of a second, really a tiny moment of a second, when in reality it's the rate of change, increase or decrease, of the amplitude of watts within a circuit due to reactances, capacitive, inductive, and frequency, happening at different rates, so that it looks like, depending on which point of view you take, it looks like time went backwards, when in fact all that happened was reactive time. The beat of time according to reactance has been less than some other reference, and making it look like the time of one went backwards and the time of the other went forwards, when such is not the case. But the simulator does not discriminate to tell you. It just gives you the net result. It's like statistics. It gives you the net result, and you got to figure out the details why it looks like physics is being violated, when in fact it's not. A statistic of a group behavior, of a collective of individuals, does not defy anything. It just looks that way. Like when you get a bunch of individuals standing up and sitting down in a football stadium, in a soccer stadium, football stadium in the Spanish, a soccer stadium, and they're standing up and sitting down, yet it looks like a wave is moving sideways in, let's say, clockwise, or it reverses, or two waves. One goes clockwise and the other goes counterclockwise. But nobody's running around the stadium. They're staying in their seat. Standing up, though, in their location, in the seat location that they've been sitting at, but they either stand up and raise their arms or sit down and lower their arms at a certain point in time and at a certain rate of change relative to everyone else, to their immediate left or their immediate right. And people are smart enough to know how to do this to manipulate the wave. But the wave is what? It's a figment of our imagination, because our brains are pattern-oriented. We're looking for patterns, and we think, oh, energy is traveling down the wire. No, it's not. A pattern of energy is traveling down the wire, a pattern of change in which the valence electrons are changing their states of energy up or down in such a manner to make it look like a ripple of energy is traveling down the transmission copper wire, when in fact it's just a ripple of change that's moving down the length of that wire. Not energy, but a change of energy. And this is now on borderline, on the fringe of segueing into the correct definition of Ohm's law. Current does not exist, but a change of voltage due to various impedances and resistances within a framework of time, that's Ohm's law. Two voltages, not the same voltage squared divided by resistance equals watts, but a real input voltage times a reactive output voltage divided by various impedances and resistances within a framework of time, namely frequency of oscillations, and a duration of duration of those frequencies of oscillations. That's the correct definition of Ohm's law. As well, we're making it simple for the beginning student who doesn't know any better. Okay, but you never make it more complicated either. You overlook the fact that you simplified it. You overlook the fact that you explained it to people objecting, who were smart enough to raise their hand in class. Oh, isn't it more complicated than this? Oh, yeah. But we're trying to keep it simple for you. You never make it more complicated to give the reality. You just stick with the overly simplified non-reality that's like a fog of a semblance of reality. 20 or 10 or 5% of it being realistic and the rest is shmush. You threw it away, left to the point of vagueness and confusion. I get all emotional about this because we lie. We never give the true version of Ohm's law. Anyway, but the main point of this recording is, what is the reversal of time? And I had to get through all this other shit to get to as backdrop, or else you wouldn't appreciate the fact that it's not a singular lie or misrepresentation that's causing us to misunderstand free energy and boot it out the door at the U.S. Patent Office saying it defies physics. No, it's defying your version of your interpretation of physics, not my version. Because my version is more complete than yours. You're acting stupid because the public is uneducated and will believe anything they're told. I've taken the trouble to learn this on my own without any preconceived notions except that something's fishy here in Denmark, according to Shakespeare's Hamlet. And, oh my God, I found this several stinking fish. Not only does current not exist, but conservation of energy is a lie. Because it's merely a hypothesis. It's not even a theory. It's used as a predicate for analysis of closed systems, but closed systems don't exist. No physicist will admit to it. Oh, well, systems tend to stabilize. Yeah, oh, good God. You mean your system that you build tends to stabilize. I can build one that's so unstable it will blow up the circuit in theory under simulation. So, and we've seen, it's a question of a 10-year flood, prevention of a 10-year flood. What kind of measures do you take versus more extreme measures you have to take to prevent a 100-year flood? When you set up your electric utility grid, various substations, capacitive banks, and banks of transformers, once in a while something weird happens and you get a blow-up of a transformer and catches fire at a substation or a pole transformer. And oops, that wasn't supposed to happen, but you know what? That was your 10-year flood. And then once in a while something more severe happens, your 100-year flood. All they've done when they've built the electric utility grid is they've played the game of statistics, in which they take certain measures that they can afford to take, cost-wise and effort-wise and materials-wise, but they don't take everything because it would be too costly, and so they merely prevent the 10-year flood, but they do not prevent the 100-year flood, in which either the whole system comes down partly, a brownout, or completely a blackout, or worse, different sections of it blow up. because there's too much energy in one area versus another area. More energy than what the system in that area was built to handle. So these are, a complex of ideas and factors that we have to consider when we consider the mere topic of overunity or free energy, also known as free energy, because there's no such thing as free energy. It just looks that way. It's freely available reactance. That's what's freely available. And because reactance is the technical term for the humanistic appreciation of efficiency, the principle of the lever, which everybody understands, but the technicality of that leverage in electrical engineering is much more technical and precise, having to do with various reactances. When you've got that principle of leverage, changing efficiency, it makes it look like you've got more energy. Now, there are three ways of making it look like you've changed energy and violated physics. One has to do with recycling energy. How efficient do you recycle it? Do you increase your efficiency? Do you diminish your efficiency, making it look like you've increased your energy or diminished your energy? That's one way. Second way is you outright steal energy from somewhere else. Your reactance acts like a pump, pumping energy against gradients of positive impedances, because now your positive impedances become negative impedances, or some other, a little trick of the trade. In any case, your reactive pump can literally steal energy at a distance. You don't have to couple directly onto a transmission line your coil that's going to do the stealing. You don't have to wrap it directly on the transmission line. You can have it a mile away, and it's going to steal anyway, in theory, according to the various simulations I've done. That's the second way that reactance can change the value of energy in your circuit. The third way is you give the circuit a low input power, extremely low, so that as it proceeds and runs, your reactive power can do nothing but increase, provided you capture the event known as a transient that happens in the very beginning when you turn on the circuit, and you capture it in such a way that it has to build up. It has to accumulate. And once you take that reactive power, which is useless in the format of reactive power, and pass it through a resistor, it's no longer useless. It's humongous. All this free energy coming out of nowhere. Where did it come from? Well, because you took that reactive power and converted it. Meanwhile, you've encouraged, not merely allow, you've encouraged the buildup of reactive power over time, the accumulation, because the oddity of the thing is that reactance works on reactance. Unlike energy doesn't work on anything. It lights up a light bulb, but only because you're losing the energy that's being converted into light, converted into heat if it's an incandescent light bulb. So the only reason why you get any benefit out of the energy is because you're throwing it away. But that's energy, based on entropy, is the way energy functions. But reactance does the opposite. It doesn't. You don't lose reactance unless you fail to put capacitors and inductors of the right parameters in the right locations of your circuit. Then that's your fault. That's your business. Nobody's guilty of a poorly designed circuit, but you, the designer. Whoever designed the circuit is the one guilty. But if you take responsibility and put everything in the right places, you can get a buildup of power at any rate to any quantity you desire. Reactive power. And pass it through a resistor, and now you've got useful real power to boil water and run a steam turbine and rotate an electric rotary generator and produce electric power without any use of nuclear power, producing plutonium as a side effect that will go into the nuclear warheads of ICBM missiles, or what do they call it? ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, ICBM, or coal-fired power plants or diesel. None of that. You don't have to do any of that. You can use all renewables and never worry about not having enough renewables to support the Earth's growing hunger for energy. Never have to worry, because you've augmented your efficiency. So you can have a tiny little mini-sized solar panel intended merely to power a credit card-sized wallet calculator that's so small it's the size of a credit card, and you stick it in your wallet and you can whip it out and do simple computations. It has a tiny little solar panel on there recharging a tiny little button battery, like a hearing aid battery. And that's enough to run a battleship or any size energy load you require, because the input of energy and the output of energy are no longer causally linked. There's no cause and there's no effect anymore, because we've put reactance in between, acting as a lever, changing the whole outcome, so that the input of energy can always maintain itself at being the same microwatt of energy. Or actually it's less than that, a nanowatt or a picowatt. Meanwhile, the output, we can change it any way we want it to be, despite the fact that the input remains the same. Now, obviously, that looks like violation of conservation of energy if conservation of energy were actually true. But that's because we've put blinders on our eyes and said, well, there's no reactance in the circuit. It's just a flashlight circuit. Okay, there's some reactance there, but it's so little that, for the most part, it's not there. So for a flashlight circuit, the conservation of energy anomaly, because it's not even a law, would apply. But to the circuits that I design, because there's no connection anymore between input energy and output energy, because reactance in the middle between those inputs and outputs changes everything and regulates that change. It could be anything you want it to be. So I hope I've said enough, but for the main point, the nature of the reversal of time is simply that the reference for time has altered itself so that from one reference it's slower, and the other reference it's faster, making it look from the point of view of the faster that the other has gone backwards, when in fact it has not. It's simply going slower. And that's essentially all I really wanted to say in this recording. But I get off on sidebars because I get all emotional, and all the shit I've learned about over the last 6.5 years, the lies, oh my God, it's unbelievable. The politics of science, it's no longer merely science, and the commercialization of the politics of science. I'll end you on one thought. I had an electrical engineer in Quora tell me that unless something sells, unless something can make a profit, it does not exist as a scientific fact unless it can make a profit. And that's the political or commercialization or the commercialized politics of science. Is that science no longer is pure science. It's influenced by the politics, by the manipulation, the administration of commerce. So commerce now has become the government, the administrative governmental body of science. And that is my last horrible thought I will end this recording on. Sorry to end it on a bad, sour note, but whatever.